Good morning. Welcome to today's webinar. This is Josh. I'm going to be your presenter today. Our topic today is accounting, entering budget. I am going to show, as I did yesterday on yesterday's event, I'd just like to remind folks about the accessing of the material in the help files with regards to that. So to access the budget screen, entry screen in accounting, of course, let me introduce my highlighter friend here. We can either in the very middle of the screen right here, we'll see the budget jar right there. Let me see if I gotten any better. Oh, then my arrow's a little better there. Or we can go to budgets here in the very upper left-hand corner up here to access that, and then budgets just below that. So if I click budgets and then budget here in the upper left corner, the little jars icon, it opens up the budget entry screen. So whether I click it here or here, it opens up budget entry. Okay. So before we get into the actual entry of the budget process, just a few things, because, part of what these, we were asked a few years ago to perhaps bring a little more practicality into the webinar events, into the training webinars, and sometimes that can be difficult. Sometimes there's just so many scenarios. There's nothing, we can't account for every possible, accounting or bookkeeping scenario in church windows. So it's really difficult sometimes to do that. But in terms of the budget, there's definitely some things that we can help make sure that folks are clear about, okay? First and foremost, the budget can only be entered for income and expense accounts only, right? 4s and 5s on the chart of accounts. So right here under total income, we see that. When we go down further, we eventually see our expenses. We can enter budgets here, but that's it. Can't enter budget for assets, liabilities, or funds, of course, okay? The budget, again, and sometimes for many of you, it may be over-explaining the obvious, but for folks that are unaware of it, because I'm sharing what I hear on my support calls a lot, and, well, at least more often than I'm sometimes surprised about it, but it's just important to understand, and as a friendly reminder, that budget is just an educated guess. It is an estimate of how much income we're going to be bringing in, and a guess or an estimate of how much money we're actually going to be spending. It's not actual real money, okay? A budget is simply a control mechanism, all right? That's all we're doing. If we're trying to maintain and control our spending and our income, all right? A lot of folks, and again, I'm going to take this a step further here in just a minute as well. It's basically, we're comparing that amount that we're estimating or guessing is going to come in income and how much we're going to be spending to the actual income that we receive and the amount of money that we're actually spending for that particular year. Okay, when we look at the treasurer's report, that's what we see. That's what we're comparing, is actual income that we've brought in or posted in to the software, compared that to what our guess was for the year, and the same is true for the expenses. Here's how much we've anticipated our expenses are going to be for the year, and here's how much we've actually spent. That's it, okay? Finally, and I'm going to get off my soapbox after this, is, folks, it's so important that both income and expense be budgeted, okay? Budgeting just expenses without income is simply a wish list without a budgeted income, okay? The simple question is, how can you possibly know how much money you're going to have to spend if you have no idea how much money is coming in, or not an idea of how much money is coming in, okay? And I get asked a lot on my support calls is, well, how do you budget income? All right, well, it's by looking at the actual income that you've received over the course of the past, recent couple, 2, 3, 4 years, okay? That is where you're going to gather your anticipated or expected income for a particular year, and the same is true for expenses as well. But expenses are a lot easier to budget, right? Because we know how much we're spending. Well, you got to look at how much you're bringing in too, okay? The income totals that you look at for a prior year are often a good indication of how much you can expect to bring in the new year, or in the upcoming year, or the year that you're budgeting for, okay? And so this is where I'm going to now introduce our most our most recently added report into accounting here, okay? I was actually really kind of happy to do this webinar now today because this is a report that we haven't really looked at much in since it's been put out, I think in 24.0, but it's up here under reports and export, under financial, and right at the bottom of the new one called Annual Comparative Treasurers Report, okay? This is a new report. This is the newest report in accounting. We have not added a report in accounting in a long time, and this one's new. So when we click on that, like our budget report, we can choose to look at income, actual income for multiple years, in income and expenses side by side for multiple years. So if I choose, say, accounting year starting 2023 through 2025, okay, I'm looking at 4 years, 23, 24, 25. I can go back further if I want. Let's go back to 22. I can filter it by a particular fund. So maybe all of your income and expenses are linked that you're going to be concerned with for your budget, say to your general fund or something. You can limit it to a fund. You can, of course, include or omit accounts with zero balances or inactive accounts. Yeah, and it says here excluding may affect report totals. So that's why we're going to leave that checked. And in accounts with zero balances, it would only omit accounts with zero, and the account with a zero balance if it had no balance in any one of the periods that I'm selecting. So it would have to have a zero balance in all 4 years in this case, okay? Then I'm going to go to, and you can limit it by custom group too, but we're not going to do that. I want to see all of my income and all of my expenses. So now I simply click print. Oh, let's go to, let's do check all accounts. That's fine. All right, so there we go. Very similar to our budget report, actually. Okay, so now it's going to bring up, it's going to generate the report. And here, notice it is comparing 25 to 24 to 23 to 22. So this then shows the actual income totals for those 4 years by year. Okay, so then I scroll down. And where's my total income? Oh, I should have included all the subtotals as well. Sorry, let's check all subtotals too and click print. Okay. So now it brings in our accounts and our subtotals. So this is the actual income under our 400 accounts. We scroll down. Here's our total income for each one of those years. Of course, this is training data. You know, we're only partly through the year and, you know, here. Either way, you know, we've got training data. It's going to be inconsistent, but yours probably will show some level of consistency over several years, might be deviating by 10 or 20,000, maybe more, depending on how, but you know, here we are, how many years past COVID, it may be drastically different for you, but this is our income for the past 4 years. Then when we scroll down to the very bottom, we see our total expenses for the same periods of time each year. And like our treasurer's report, a difference between the income and the expenses for each one of those periods. This is the best report now to use to try to build and help anticipate what your income and expense budgets are going to be for, say, 2026. Okay? So I just want to show that report. This is one that folks have not been, we've not gotten a lot of calls on it, but it's maybe because folks haven't known about it. But I really felt that this webinar was a good opportunity to really bring this report to folks' attention, because if I were managing a budget, you know, for an upcoming year for a church, this would be one of the very first reports I would look at. Why am I not looking at the treasurer's report itself, the actual main treasurer's report? Because that only allows us to really look at 1 year at a time. And it looks at budget figures as well. All I'm concerned with here is how much did we actually bring in income and how much did we actually expense or spend, and this report compares multiple periods side by side. Enormous power when budget planning in this report here, okay? So just wanted to bring that to your attention. Hope that proves helpful, because I think it's an amazing report now. Users have been clamoring and asking for it for years. It's now finally here, okay? So, you know, and again, to kind of make the final point on the budgeting income versus expense, okay? In terms of that, if you're budgeting your income and your expenses and you look at that treasurer's report for, say, 2026, and you go, oh, well, my expenses, anticipated budgeted expenses are $20,000 higher than what I'm anticipating in my income. Where is that difference or shortfall going to come from? Okay. I mean, that's exactly what the budgeting is all about. That's its job, is to try to make sure that we have enough money to spend for what we need what we need to keep the doors open and keep things running and the lights on and, and everything else. So when you're looking at that and you're looking at that budget amount and it goes, wow, my expenses are higher. Do we have to tighten our belts? Do we have to cut our expenses somewhere? Or where do we get that additional money based on the difference between that income budget and that expense budget if there's a shortfall? Okay. So that's the final thing I'm going to say about that. Okay. With about, well, it's only 12 minutes in, but that's all right because like I said, I'm going to try to keep it to 20 or around there. So now we're going to go back to our budget entry window and let's talk about getting that budget amount entered. Once you've known that, okay, well, and I should probably point out the budget report as well. All right. So when building that budget, it's important to look at the budget report because, again, I can run it for multiple years. So let's say I want to run it for 23 to 24, or 25. This is going to actually show me the budget figures that I have entered for different years. So put this report side by side with that new annual comparative report or annual comparative treasurer's report, and it's going to be really helpful for folks. Presentation is the common one. I can choose a fund again. I can include or omit accounts with zero budgets or inactive accounts. I can include a budget line. But now if I go to print, it's now going to actually show me the budget figures that I have entered for the years that I've selected with a line that folks can pen or pencil in a budget amount in that they can then decide, hey, here's how much we're going to budget for these different accounts or not, as the case may be, okay? These are just budgeted accounts. There's no accounts in here that do not have a budget in any one of those years, okay? So again, an important tool to use when budgeting. In comparison, when using that comparative annual treasurer's report, again, it should provide virtually everything you need. If I want to see grand totals or totals of those budgets, I should go over here and do my check all subtotals so it does summarize or total those for me. See, so I've got some here that I don't have any totals, but now when I go down to the bottom, it should bring in a total of my total expense budgets. Here they are. I haven't changed them over the years. Here, and then my income, where's income? Right up here. Yep. So in this case, in our case for our budget here, we had a shortfall, right? So where's that 40,000 going to come from? Important question, okay? Reality, of course, is often different from what we're guessing, but we're trying to make sure that we're maintaining control. All right, so let's go back to the budget entry window. I've opened 2026. It's important to understand, folks, we're kind of talking about these things now because we're approaching the end of year and you're going to be preparing for the new year. And so we're beginning now that it's coming to the end of September, beginning of October. Many of our webinars are going to be about end of year, new year prep stuff, things like that. And so the budgeting is just kind of the beginning of that, okay? But I can't enter a budget for 2026 without opening that accounting year, okay? So I've gone ahead and opened 2026. I'm not going to keep covering opening a new year. If you want to go ahead and look and see about opening the next accounting year, I would strongly advise you go back to our website. Let me get back to churchwindows.com. Oh, there it is up here. If we go right to customer support, new year prep and help, folks, okay, there is where you're going to be able to see all things in new year, end of year for membership, donations, accounting, payroll, everything here. There's your accounting new year prep steps. You can open the new year anytime you want, okay? Still work back and forth between the old and the new years, okay? Just a reminder of that. But we're going to have probably an accounting new year, setting up in the new accounting year webinar here in the next month or two on that, okay? So I'm not going to be covering that today, but I've gone ahead and opened that year, okay? So now I can go up to budgets and budget. I copied my budget amounts from the previous year. That's why they're the same. But if, let's say, general tithes and offerings now, we've chosen or entered it as a monthly budget amount, all right? That's because, we've made that choice. You can, all right? But there are three options here: annual, quarterly, and monthly. So I could go through and edit each one of the months independently if I wish. I could also go up to quarterly, and I could edit those quarterly amounts, and they would shift accordingly for either annual or monthly. Or I can go up to annual, and I can go ahead and say, okay, our income over the course of the past few years has increased exponentially, so we're going to anticipate that our income budget for 2026 is going up quite a bit. So we're going to say it's gone up to 348,951. Okay? And now notice when I tab, it now auto distributes that over each one of both the quarterly and the monthly. All right? And it does its best to subdivide those all over those. Budget amounts can only be entered with whole dollar amounts, okay? Cannot enter pennies. That's a design choice. Our developers determined that, putting pennies on one expense account would be offset by pennies lower on another expense account. And our belief is that the cents overall makes little to no difference in the bigger scheme or annual scheme of things. By entering whole dollars, not in no sense. So no pennies can be entered for that, okay? You can set the budget amount to 0 if you wish, okay? But it starts by checking the account, right? So general tithes and offerings was checked because I brought that forward from the prior year. But if you're setting up the budget for the very first time, none of these accounts in this column, and I'm talking about this column right here, the budgeted column right here in the middle, are going to be checked. Okay, none of those are going to be checked if you're setting up the budget for the very first time. So you have to go in and check that. Okay, so let's go down here and see right here. I've got one called Building Fund Contribution. I click on it. Nothing is there on the right? Because I haven't checked the box. So if I want to enter a budget for building fund contributions, I have to put a check mark in there. Now notice that annual, quarterly, monthly light up. It's available to me. It defaults to monthly, but I'm going to typically enter annual. It's just it just quickly, easily auto distributes that. So let's say that we're anticipating on building fund income is going to be 32,500. Let me click in there, do that. So there it is. Hit tab. It auto distributes it over each one of them and makes the adjustments at the end of each quarter for any dollar differences on that, okay? I can still change down and edit them quarterly or monthly, okay? But if I leave it as annual, it'll still auto distribute it over any one of the others, okay? With that being said, as I pointed out, I do also have a building fund expense account. So if I go down here, I really want to make sure that I'm entering a building fund expense as well, which has also not been budgeted. So my budget team has to determine how much we're going to be budgeting for our building fund expenses as well, and then coming in here and entering those amounts, okay, accordingly. All right. So let's say we're anticipating 30,000 in building fund expenses for the year, okay? One final thing I want to talk about before the final topic here and we wrap things up. An example, some folks ask me, Josh, well, where would be a time when we might want to be able to budget for something that would be more internal, like for monthly or quarterly? That's a really good question. So right here, see, I've got wedding income. Haven't been budgeting for that. Well, right? Most of us generally know most weddings occur when the weather is warmer, right? Starting in April, May, or June. That might be a good use of maybe monthly or quarterly budget where I go, okay, I'm going to be receiving the bulk, if not all, of my wedding income in quarters 2 and 3. All right? So maybe I might receive $4,000 of wedding income in the second quarter, and I might receive $2,500 in quarter 3. Okay? So now notice it still just puts those into each one of the months within that quarter, leaving the other months as 0, and then also summarizes it under the total annual budget at the top, okay? So again, a really nice level of control that you have to be able to determine when the budget shows up and when it does not, okay? All right, so let me take a quick look at what I typed up here. So, okay. Okay, yeah, well, folks, again, once a budget's entered, unless voted on by the committee or your trustees or board or budget committee, it's not going to be changed. It can be, but you generally don't do that. It's set, it's set, okay? Finally, budgeting for subtotal. This has been in the software for quite some time, and yet I still believe it's a commonly or frequently underutilized function, part of the budget function, okay? And our subtotals and subaccounts are identified, one, subtotals by the black arrows here. So I've got one called building fund income, okay? Notice there's a checkbox next to that. I can budget for that grouping of accounts, okay? Same thing is true for something like a ledger with subaccounts, like right here, investments, interest, or investment income, okay? That has a check mark as well. That's only permissible because all of the accounts in either the ledger or the subtotal are all linked to the same fund, okay? If they were linked to different funds, it would not permit us to do this, okay? But a common example that I've been using on my webinars for quite a few years, and I think it's quite effective because I think it really kind of nicely presents the picture, is if I put in, here's my gas, okay, my utilities. I've got a subtotal called utilities. So for several years, I've entered individual budget amounts for my telephone and internet service and, gas, natural gas and electric and water expenses. Well, you do have the ability to put a budget in just for the subtotal to include all of those accounts, okay? So even though it's got all of those accounts with check marks, if I now try to put a check mark in that box called total utilities, it'll pop up with this message. It'll say, this will remove budgets for subsidiary accounts and or subtotals, continue. And if I click yes on that or okay, now notice it puts the grand total of what was entered as the budget for all of those accounts into the subtotal called total utilities. So many of you may be thinking, well, how does that help me? Well, think about it from maybe gas and electric standpoint, okay? It doesn't matter necessarily how much I expense through any one of these individual accounts. It only matters how much I expense through all of them collectively. So if I have a particularly cool summer, that might help offset a particularly cold winter with my gas expense. Maybe you're starting to see where I'm going on this. This is the accounts there for the budget itself. So budgeting for subtotal can be very helpful in ways that folks maybe are unaware of or or don't really know that they could do. So just like to bring that to your attention that you can budget for a subtotal of accounts, or I can do the same thing, say for up here, for example, for my subledgers with my senior minister's, say, payroll package, right? If I uncheck or check the main ledger, it pops up with the same message. I click on that. It removes the expenses, the check marks from the individual accounts and puts it into the subtotal. And then all that matters is how much I expense through all of those accounts collectively, okay? Let's see here. Let me look at my paper here. One final thing. Once you've been working with Church Windows accounting for 1 year, okay, budget, income and expenses only, don't have to have a budget, you can go up here to the upper left and use this feature called budget projection. So the budget projection opens and it says you've got exclusive access to the screen. So now it's loading my current expenses and budgets for the year, prior year budget, prior year actual, projected budget. So what you can do is you can have the software pre-populate or auto-populate the current year's budget based on an overall increase or decrease in either based on the prior year's income and expense actuals or the prior year's income or expense budget totals. So if I go, okay, I'm going to increase my income budget by 2% based on last year's budgeted income, and I'm going to decrease my expenses by 3% based on last year's actual. And then I just click View Projection. And it makes the changes to the and views those or enters those under the projected budget totals, okay? And if I like it, I can save it and the software will populate those as the budgets for those accounts. But again, if you don't have a budget entered for the prior year, it will only look at the current year's actuals. So just FYI, there's things here that you can utilize for the budget that you may or may not have been aware of, and you might consider begin using those now or in future. Okay, so with a couple minutes left, folks, I'm just going to cancel and close out of that. We're not going to keep that. But that is where we are going to leave things for today.